Have you recently been dumped or ghosted? Are you struggling because honestly it sucks? Well, watch today's video where I'll go through 10 tips to help you during this difficult time period. Hey guys, if this is your first time around here, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. Okay, tip number one. It's normal and it happens to most of us. I don't want to say all because I'm sure someone's going to say like, oh, I've never been rejected, which is great for you. But I will say that it's happened to most of us, myself included, most of the clients I work with as well. So I just want to start off with tip number one. It's just really accepting that if you're going to be dating, engaging with others, being in relationships, it's normal that at some point you might be rejected. So I just want to start that off the bat because I think sometimes there's this impression that being rejected doesn't really happen a lot, or it only happens to a select few of us, and that clearly means something's wrong with us. Nope. It happens to most of us, whether that looks like getting ghosted, whether that looks like getting stood up, whether that looks like getting dumped in a long-term relationship or dating for a couple months and getting dumped. So again, just really recognizing that this range of, getting rejected, whatever that looks like, happens to most people on this planet who are engaging in romantic relationships. Okay, tip number two, it's really noticing if your mind is associating this rejection with your self-worth. So I find that it's really common, especially with people who struggle with self-esteem or shame or not feeling so good about themselves, that when they get rejected, they really start to associate that means that they're unlovable or that they're unworthy or that something's like concretely or crucially wrong about who they are as a person. And none of that is true. And outside of it, whether it's true or not, none of that is helpful for you in moving forward. So really, I just want you to notice your mind's tendency to make that type of association if it does that, right? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe your mind doesn't do that. And great. Fine, no big deal. But again, if your mind tends to really make that thought pattern like something's wrong with you, or you're not good enough, or you're unworthy, or you're unlovable, just really kind of notice that equation that your mind's making, but don't get so caught up in it, right? And so again, not even so much focusing on whether it's true or not, just really noticing that story and labeling it, and noticing that you don't have to act as if that story is true. You can just notice that that's something that your mind's doing. A thought is just a thought. It doesn't have to be true or real. It's just something that's happening in your mind. Okay, tip number three, accept that you're going to have a time period where it just sucks, right? So the reason I say that is because I think one part of, dealing with romantic rejection, a lot of times people are just like, well, just get over it, move on. Like, don't have that period of maybe mourning or grief or, allowing yourself to feel bad. That's normal and part of the process, right? That hurts. I mean, it would hurt for any of us to feel like we got rejected. And again, whatever range that looks like. So really acknowledging that you just need some time and that it's going to be tough, right? So noticing if there are thoughts of, associating it with your self-worth, which we already talked about, or any other thoughts of like kind of replaying the relationship or replaying the situation to think about what you did wrong or what you could have done differently, like kind of ruminating on the relationship or interaction, depending on the situation. And also noticing how that makes you feel. So that may make you feel sad or disappointed or, again, shameful. But outside of that, just really noticing what you're feeling and accepting that process is just part of it, right? Part of getting through a rejection, dealing with a breakup, is that there's going to be a tough time period. So tip number four, it's getting really clear on how do you want to show up for yourself during this difficult time period. So this is a little bit of a values piece, but a lot of times when my clients are struggling with this difficult, time period where they feel like they got rejected, it's also being clear like, okay, this is a tough time. So how do you want to show up for yourself during this tough time? Typically that looks like being kind to yourself. Typically that looks like, giving yourself time to grieve. That also looks like, reaching out for support, doing the things that you really enjoy in this time period. And in either way, not going too overboard in terms of getting really stuck in this hole of feeling like not good enough, or the opposite, not giving yourself any permission to be in that space. So once you're clear on how that looks like for you, that can be your roadmap. And if you're not sure, a good tip is just to think about, okay, whether it's something you've seen depicted in TV or movies or someone it's, when they've gone through a rejection and you were like, looked at it and you thought like, wow, they did a really good job. I wish I could have done that. What were they doing, right? Were they really taking care of their physical needs? Were they really just, focusing on other areas of their life? Were they maybe investing in a hobby? whatever it is. So just getting clear on what that roadmap is for you during this time period. So maybe when you start doing other activities that aren't within that range, where maybe you start being really super self-critical, or maybe you start isolating, you have a good sense that that's not what you want to do. That's not how you want to show up for yourself during this time period. In the comments below, what does that roadmap look for you? How do you want to show up during this difficult time period, right? What is a value-based decision for you and how you want to show up for yourself during this moment of difficulty? And let me know so we all have a general sense of what other people's roadmaps look like. Number 5, it's associated with tip number 4, but it's a little bit different. So really it's taking care of your needs during this time period. So we just talked about having a really clear roadmap. So on one end, I encourage you to commit to what that looks like, right? So really being clear on committing to what those behaviors look like. But this other piece is just really being clear on taking care of your needs, right? So really kind of going back to the basics, are you getting enough sleep during this time period? Maybe you need to lay off some of the social media if it's causing you a lot of like comparison or the desire to, look at this person or X or stalk their profile or IG or TikTok or whatnot. Maybe you really need to focus on like, okay, you're going to recommit to doing like yoga 3 times a week or continue that practice if that's what you do. Maybe spend some time, connecting with friends or reaching out to your family or loved ones, whatever it is. So just really kind of going back to the basics and taking care of yourself. I'm not saying like don't give yourself permission to like go get some ice cream and like watch whatever you need to watch or listen to whatever you need to listen to. But again, knowing that like, is that what you need in that moment, and really taking care of yourself, and doing that maybe 1 or 2 days is okay. But like if you're doing that for 2 weeks, maybe you feel like now it's not really taking care of yourself. So really noticing and distinguishing what you really need to do to take care of yourself. Give me a thumbs up if you plan on taking care of yourself during this time period. Let me know by a thumbs up that you are committing to your self-care. All right, next tip, give yourself time to process whatever you're feeling. So we talked a lot about accepting that this is going to be a time period, but the other piece is really giving yourself the time to actually process and feel whatever you feel, to notice what's coming up for you, and not have the urge or tendency to just right away jump into either dating or to like avoid that difficult time period. So again, there is no right time, this recommended time of like, 1 month for every month that you were dating. No, you're ultimately the one that gets to decide when you're ready and what that looks like. But giving yourself that permission to explore, like, what is this bringing up for you? What does this really mean for you? What's showing up, right? And to really know, like, do you have to do anything different next time, right? Was there any red flags that maybe you missed, or anything that you didn't do or didn't show up how you really wanted to show up in this interaction? So again, giving yourself that time and space to really process that versus needing to jump right into, let's just, start dating again. Notice if you have any instances to be impulsive. So what does that mean or look like? Really be clear if like you're looking for some type of instant gratification in whatever form that looks like, right? So maybe you're just looking to hop on Tinder and find the next available person to hook up with, which isn't necessarily wrong, but looking at the intention, right? Like, are you just looking to do that to, avoid feeling uncomfortable? Are you looking to do that because you're trying to quiet out the thoughts that you're not good enough, you're unworthy, so you just want some like external validation or a quick hookup? Again, so just really noticing a tendency to be impulsive, right? So again, whether that's just like quickly dating to kind of move on and not really sit with this uncomfortable feeling, or maybe this tendency to really want to continue reaching out to your ex or to this person that ghosted you, or to try to learn and understand more, right? So maybe that looks like, stalking their IG or TikTok or whatever the case is, just to know more, learn more, or like looking at your past photos together and really, that spirals you to want to reach out. So again, just noticing any tendency to be really impulsive and trying as much as possible to kind of catch yourself before you engage in the behavior. So really noticing a lot of times it is because there's some type of uncomfortable feeling driving this impulsive behavior. And some of it is that you're just unaware. So really kind of being clear beforehand, like what typically have you done in the past that later you're like, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. So getting clear on what does that look like for you so you can kind of get ahead of it. Next tip, really notice what your mind's doing in relation to your ex. So a lot of times I'll see kind of the spectrum of either really hyper focusing and it's almost like you only remember the good things, right? Which is really common during a breakup, right? You only think about like, oh, remember that really great date we had, or that sweet instance, or, that text exchange, or that trip we took together. So really kind of just focusing in on the good and like kind of making you feel really worse or, missing this person a lot. So noticing that. And with that also kind of your mind's filter of like, this person was like the only one, right? This was your soulmate. You'll never find someone again. I'm being a little dramatic here, like, using dramatic language, but again, just really notice how your mind really does that. And it's really common. And I find that a lot. And so if that's the case, just notice that. Start to point that out, like, oh, my mind's doing that. He's the only one, or she's the only one, or they're the only one that, are meant for me, and noticing how that keeps you in a trap. The other piece too, it's also maybe your mind's tendency like to only focus on like all the shittiest qualities of this person or your relationship or your interaction, and it makes you feel like justified or resentful or whatever the case is. So notice that too, right? And maybe that's accurate or true. I'm not so sure. I'm assuming there's probably more of a balanced approach where there were some good moments, hence you stayed in this interaction for some reason. But really kind of noticing your mind's tendency to just like extremely focus on one extreme or the other, and how that's either helping you or hurting you, right? So typically in my, practice, I've seen that when you get really stuck or rigid on one perspective or the other, it just keeps you really stuck somehow. So really start noticing what those patterns look like. Okay, next tip. Seek support. You don't have to go through this alone. I think this is so important, especially when we're dealing with a rejection, which is so common to feel like it's tough and it's difficult. But really give yourself space to go seek out support, whether it's friends, whether it's, your family. You figure that out, even an online community. So really just figuring out what that looks like for you, but you don't have to deal with this in isolation, because I think that's one of the hardest things, that when we're going through a really hard time and we're just kind of dealing with it alone, and we're not, talking to other people, seeking support. And sometimes just talking to other people will really help us realize, like, well, is that the most helpful way to look at it? Or like, man, getting validation from other people. It's so crucial to do that during this time period. Okay, last tip. And I save this one for last because I think this one, it might be a little bit difficult, but really give yourself permission to, once maybe you've gone through the initial difficult phase, really exploring, like, is this an opportunity for self-reflection? Because again, I think we all have opportunities for growth. No one's perfect, especially when we think about romantic relationships. That can really trigger a lot of our stuff. I know it does for me, and that's just normal. That's just how we are wired. And so really, thinking about, is this an opportunity for you to self-reflect in any way, shape, or form? But self-reflect in a way of noticing patterns that aren't always the healthiest. Like, maybe do you miss red flags? Do you end up in toxic relationships? Were there clearly signs that maybe this wasn't going to work out, but you still kept pursuing it, or whatever the case is? So just really getting clear on what those kind of patterns might be for you, if any, right? Sometimes there are none, but again, just really noticing that for you to be clear maybe what you can change or what can be different going forward in future romantic interactions. But really, really key here is don't shame yourself. So again, noticing these patterns, and that's why I'm saying maybe not helpful at the onset, because maybe it's still too fresh. You're still in that space. Your mind is still trying to convince you that it was somehow your fault or you're not good enough, whatever the case is. So maybe if that's, at the beginning, it's too tough, but once you've maybe gotten over that difficult slump, really then kind of taking a moment to self-reflect and look at, is there any kind of opportunities here for growth or change, or just kind of self-knowledge and what you can do differently to really know and understand yourself, or also know and understand what you want or don't want in a partner or in a relationship. Tips to help you during life's difficulties or other mental health challenges. I encourage you to subscribe to my channel now, and I encourage you to check out this video. Like I said, if you struggle with shame, this is a really good video to help you deal 5 steps to help you move through shame. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you. Thanks, guys.